I'm Nathan, and my wedding day wasn't supposed to start with a question mark. But there I was, standing next to the cake, smiling for 1,000 flashing phones, while my eyes swept across the reception hall like I'd lost something. Or someone. And I had. My brother, Eric. He wasn't in the crowd. He wasn't anywhere. Someone, I think it was our cousin Jenny, half tipsy and whispering too loud, said, "He's not coming. Said you chose the military over family." The words didn't sting the way they should have. They landed like facts I already knew, but hoped had changed. I nodded as if she'd told me the bar was closing early and turned back to the party. Cameras kept flashing. People kept laughing. I kept smiling. Inside, though, it felt like I was balancing on a rotted floorboard. Eric wasn't always like this. He was the kind of big brother who taught me to swim by throwing me into the deep end, literally, then jumping in after me when I didn't come up fast enough. We built forts together in the woods behind Grandpa's cabin and swore they were ours forever. He was loud, stubborn, reckless, but he was mine. And now he wasn't here. Again. The DJ queued up our first dance song. Mia's hand found mine, soft and certain. She smiled, that grounding, luminous kind of smile that could pull me back from anywhere. I smiled back, leaned close, and whispered, "I think he really didn't come." She didn't flinch. "I know," she said. "We're still going to have a beautiful night." And we did, or at least we faked it convincingly. The cake cutting, the toasts, the dancing, all of it blurred together like a montage from someone else's life. My mom cried during our first dance, but not for the usual reasons. She kept glancing at the empty seat at the family table, the one with a place card that read Eric. I could feel the weight of that absence like a hand pressing into my chest. Every time someone shouted, "Congratulations, man!" or clapped me on the back with a red Solo cup in hand, I'd nod and thank them and wonder if Eric would ever even meet Mia. If he'd ever see the life I was trying to build. Earlier that morning, just before the ceremony, my unit had surprised me with a gift. A folded American flag in a display case, lined with the names of everyone I'd served with in my last deployment. I'd held it like it was made of glass, tears pricking behind my eyes. My commander had said, "To honor your service and your future, Sergeant." I'd thought about Eric then. About how he used to say I was running away to play hero when I enlisted. I wanted to tell him I wasn't running. I was building something, and I wanted him to be part of it. But maybe that ship had already sunk, and I was the only one still scanning the shoreline for its sails. The reception continued into the night. We danced, we drank, we laughed. But when I caught Mia watching me from across the room, the way her smile tightened when I thought I looked okay, I knew she saw it too. The hollow part. The seat that stayed empty. The silence that was louder than any toast. The applause faded like a tide pulling back, leaving only the sticky echo of music and the blur of too many faces. People were still mingling, laughing, scraping frosting off paper plates with plastic forks, but I felt like I was underwater. Numb. Suspended. Like everything around me was just noise. Mia squeezed my hand under the table. "You've got that look again," she murmured, leaning close. "Like you're somewhere else." I blinked, tried to smile. "Just tired." She didn't push. She never did. That's what I loved about her. Mia never forced me to say what I wasn't ready to admit. But the weight in my chest wasn't going away, not while that chair stayed empty. My mom had tried to explain it earlier, in the way only she could, vague, apologetic, full of unsaid things. "He's busy," she'd said, tucking a loose curl behind her ear as the hairdresser pinned in her updo. "You know how he gets. Big crowds, lots of eyes, and after everything, that's what we call the silence now. 5 years of missed calls, short replies, awkward birthday texts with no emojis. No, hey bro, congrats when I got promoted. Not even a like when I posted about proposing to Mia. Just quiet. I used to tell myself he needed space, that one day he'd come around, but that hope was wearing thin, like an old shirt I kept folding and refolding even though I hadn't worn it in years. The DJ called for another toast, this time from Mia's college roommate. I stood, arm around Mia, and lifted my glass when everyone else did. But the words blurred together. Memories of dorm life, late-night pizza, a tearful, I knew she'd find someone who could handle her fire. Laughter. Clinking glasses. I laughed too, on cue. That's what the day required. The public face. Grateful groom. Dutiful son. Veteran with the pretty bride and the photogenic smile. I was all those things, but none of them felt like me. Later, while posing for yet another photo beside the chocolate fountain, my uncle pulled me aside. He smelled like cologne and bourbon. "You did good, kid," he said, clapping my shoulder. "You turned out solid. Not like, well." He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Not like Eric. I just nodded, stared past him at the dance floor where Mia twirled with her niece, her veil spinning like a halo. For a second, I let myself imagine Eric there too, laughing, making some dumb joke, embarrassing me in front of Mia's parents probably, but he'd be there, part of it, part of us. Instead, I was left with a question that had no answer. Was I celebrating a beginning or mourning an ending that had already happened? The reception rolled on, and I kept playing the part. But every laugh, every cheer, every flash of the camera, it all felt just a little too bright. Too loud, like the whole world was trying to drown out one quiet truth. He's not coming. And maybe he never was. It started with a letter. I was 13. Eric was 16 and already pulling away, already disappearing into his music and his friends and the kind of rebellion our parents couldn't quite handle. I was the quiet one, the kid who made his bed without being asked and saluted the flag every morning at school because it felt like the only thing that made sense. He left the letter on my pillow. No envelope, just folded once, with my name scrawled across the front in his messy, slanted handwriting. "Don't let them turn you into a robot." That was all it said. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I kept the note anyway, tucked inside a shoebox under my bed next to baseball cards and old birthday cards. And then, life happened. Sports, girlfriends, college applications, and finally, the Army. I forgot about the note until I packed up my childhood room for the last time and found it again. I held it in my hands for what felt like hours. Don't let them turn you into a robot. By then, I'd already enlisted, already shaved my head and started calling grown men sir, and sleeping in bunks with strangers, already become exactly what he warned me about. That was the beginning. After that, things between us weren't just strained, they were frozen. He'd roll his eyes when I talked about basic training. When I came home on leave, he'd barely be around, and when he was, he'd make jokes that didn't feel like jokes. Did they program your emotions out yet, or is that next tour? Bet the Army loves you. You follow orders like a golden retriever. At first, I'd laugh, brush it off. He was my brother, he didn't mean it. But deep down, those words stuck. Because he did mean it. He saw something in me that felt like a betrayal. Birthdays came and went. Christmases, too. One year, I mailed him a signed football from our favorite team. He didn't even text to say thanks. Another year, I sent a framed photo of the two of us from when we were kids, standing in front of the cabin with mud on our jeans and fireflies in our hands. No reply. It got to the point where I stopped sending things altogether. What was the point of reaching out when it always felt like begging? And still, every time I came home, I hoped. Hoped he'd show up to a family dinner. Hoped he'd pull into the driveway with that same dented truck he drove in high school and say, "All right, bro, let's talk." But he never did. I wasn't sure when exactly the distance stopped being about politics or pride or even the military. At some point, it just became the air between us. Always there, always cold. I'd tried to thaw it. God, I'd tried. But some silences grow teeth. And I was tired of being the only one bleeding. They handed me the flag just after sunrise. The wedding wasn't for another 6 hours, but my unit had insisted on a private moment before everything began. My commander, Lieutenant Barker, was the one to present it. Standing ramrod straight, uniform crisp, his voice carrying that quiet weight that only comes from years in the field. "To Sergeant Nathan Hayes," he said, as he unfolded the flag between us, the fabric stiff and ceremonial. "For your service, for your leadership, and for your future." I stood at attention, every muscle tight, heart hammering like I was back in the desert. And then he handed it to me, folded sharp, the stars perfectly centered. A tribute, not to a death, but to a life rebuilt. A new chapter. It was the first time I ever cried in uniform. Not sobbing, just a single tear that snuck down my cheek before I could stop it. I blinked fast and nodded, holding the flag against my chest like it could fill every crack I didn't talk about. The ones that started overseas and spread wider each year. Eric stayed gone. "You all right, Sergeant?" Barker asked, voice low. "Not military, just human." I looked down at the flag, at my own reflection in the glass case. I wish my brother could see this. He didn't ask which brother. Everyone in my unit knew the story. They'd heard the late-night rants after too many beers, the slurred confessions about a sibling who vanished long before I ever deployed. The one I still sent postcards to even though he never wrote back. "You never know," Barker said. "Sometimes people show up when you least expect them." I wanted to believe that. Really, I did. But hope felt like something I used to wear, like a jacket that stopped fitting after the fourth tour and too many unopened messages. I carried the flag to the car myself, laid it gently in the back seat like it was sacred. Because to me, it was. Not just for the country, but for every night I'd spent wondering if I was building a life my family could be proud of, or one they'd resent forever. Mia saw it when I got home. She didn't ask questions. She just walked over, ran her fingers along the edge of the case, and whispered, "It's beautiful." I looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time that day, the knot in my chest loosened. "I wanted Eric to see this," I said. "I wanted him to know I'm not just some pawn in a machine, that I did something real, something good." Mia didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She wrapped her arms around me, rested her head against my chest, and let me stand there holding the flag, holding her, holding on to the last threads of a brother I hadn't seen in years. And for one breath. Just one. That felt like enough. It had taken me 2 years. 2 years of working double shifts, bank appointments, long nights staring at blueprints and budgets. I'd called in favors from old friends in construction, saved every deployment stipend I could scrape together, and negotiated a deal so tight it practically squeaked. But I did it. I bought the cabin, the same cabin where Eric and I built that crooked fort behind the woodshed, where we roasted marshmallows with Grandpa Bill and carved our initials into the porch railing like we were claiming it as our kingdom. It had been our family's before. Taxes and time made it someone else's. But now, it was ours again. Mine, technically. But that was never the plan. Mia sat beside me on the edge of our hotel bed that night, still in her wedding dress, barefoot and glowing from champagne and compliments. I pulled the folded deed from my jacket pocket and placed it in her hands. "What's this?" she asked, eyebrows lifting as she unfolded the paper. I didn't say anything at first, just watched her eyes scan the print, the address, the signature. Her lips parted slowly and she looked up at me like I'd just handed her a treasure map. "You bought it?" she whispered. "The cabin?" I nodded. "Restored it too. Roof's new. Plumbing works, fireplace still smells like pine smoke. And there's enough space now for everyone." She set the paper down gently, as if it might crumble from too much force. "You didn't tell me." "I wanted to wait," I said, "until after the wedding, until it felt real. I wanted it to be a gift." She reached for my hand, warm and steady. "It is. It's beautiful. But is this for us, or is this for Eric?" I looked away. The room was quiet, save for the faint thump of music downstairs where the reception still spun without us. "It's for everyone," I said finally. "For the holidays we missed. For the birthdays I only called in for. For the Christmas when Dad cried in the garage and said he didn't know if we'd ever all be under one roof again." Mia's fingers tightened around mine. "I wanted it to be a place we could come back to," I continued. All of us. No more awkward hotel rooms or split plans. Just the cabin, like it used to be, but better. She didn't say anything for a long time, just leaned forward and kissed me, slow and soft. "He might not come," she said when she pulled back. "I know," I replied, "but you're still going to invite him." "I already did." The silence between us said more than any vow. It was filled with the hope I was too afraid to name. Maybe it wouldn't fix things, maybe he'd never forgive me, but the door would be open, and that had to count for something. Dinner was almost over when I noticed it. The seat at the end of the family table, third from the right, beside the groomsman, where his name card sat like a sad little flag, was still empty. I'd saved that spot for Eric? Told the planner he was tentative, told my mother he might surprise us, told myself not to get my hopes up. But now the main course was cleared, the champagne was being refilled for toasts, and his chair looked more like a gravestone than a place setting. I could feel eyes on it, too. Not many. Most guests were too busy laughing, flirting, posing for selfies under the fairy lights. But my mother saw it. Her eyes flicked to it every time someone raised a glass. She'd touch her napkin to her mouth, nod at whoever was talking, and then glance at the vacancy like it might suddenly fill itself if she stared hard enough. Mia leaned in close and whispered, "You want to take a walk?" I shook my head. "Can't yet. Best man's speech is next." She squeezed my thigh under the table, discreet and grounding. "You sure?" I nodded, even though I wasn't. I felt like I was watching my own wedding from outside my body, floating somewhere between the tablecloth and the ceiling lights, waiting for Eric to burst through the door with that smug, lazy smile and a six-pack under his arm. Late, unapologetic, like always. But he didn't. The seat stayed empty. And when my best friend Marcus finally stood, tapped his glass, and cleared his throat, I watched my mother fold her hands tightly in her lap. Her rings clicked together. Her smile was tight, her shoulders tense. Marcus gave a killer speech. Funny, heartfelt, just the right amount of sentimental. People laughed at the story about me dislocating my shoulder, trying to impress Mia with a one-handed pull-up, and they cheered when he called us the most annoyingly in-love couple on earth. But through it all, my eyes kept drifting back to the end of the table. Eric's chair was a black hole, pulling at every happy moment, every clink of glass, every smile I tried to wear like armor. After the speech, Mom leaned over, her voice soft. "He said he wasn't ready." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared at my wine glass and felt the weight of all the years between us pressed down like bricks. "He'll come around," she added, her hand brushing my arm. "Eventually." Eventually. That's the word we always use to patch over the holes, to explain away the silence. Eventually, he'll call. Eventually, he'll show up. Eventually, he'll stop holding the past like a knife and point it somewhere other than my direction. But eventually is a long time to wait. I forced myself to stand. Walked over to the DJ booth and asked for 5 minutes. He handed me the mic like it weighed nothing. To me, it felt like 100 pounds. "Hey," I said, and the room quieted fast. "Before we get back to the party, I just want to say thank you for being here, for celebrating with us, for showing up." I paused. The word sat heavy in my mouth. "Showing up means more than you know," I added, eyes drifting one last time to that empty seat. "It really, really does." I handed the mic back and walked off before anyone could ask questions, before anyone could look too closely at the crack in my voice. The night went on. The lights got softer, the music louder, and the champagne kept flowing. But the seat stayed empty. And in a room full of people who loved me, I'd never felt more like something was missing. The drive began at midnight. Mia was half asleep on the couch, still in her second dress, hair curling at the ends from hours of dancing and laughter. I kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "I'm going." She didn't stir much, just mumbled, "Take the snacks in the bag." And the good playlist. I grabbed the deed, still in its envelope, and slid it into the glove compartment beside the folded flag. The two symbols of my life, one earned, one offered, resting side by side like they were waiting to be delivered. The The rain had just started when I pulled out of the hotel lot. A soft, steady tapping against the windshield, as if the sky was trying to talk me out of this. I turned up the wipers, ignored it. I didn't want to call ahead, didn't want to give him the option to say no. I knew if I heard his voice, heard the weight behind his silence, I might not be able to keep going. This wasn't a request. It was a decision. I wasn't starting my marriage with more silence. The road stretched ahead in slick black lines. Every mile felt like penance. For the birthdays I'd missed, for the letters he never answered, for the fights that started with nothing and ended with everything broken. I rehearsed the words over and over again. I bought the cabin. For us. For what we lost. Because I miss you. But no version sounded right. They all felt too big, or too small, or too late. The rain came down harder as the hours passed. Headlights slashed through it like dull blades. I gripped the wheel tight and tried to remember the last time I'd seen his face. Not in a picture, not through a phone screen. In person. 3 years ago. Grandma's funeral. He stood near the back of the chapel, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. We'd nodded at each other. That was it. A single, useless nod. I hated that I remembered what he was wearing, but not what we said. Maybe we didn't say anything. Maybe that was the beginning of the end. Around 4:30 a.m., I stopped at a gas station on the state line. The lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly green glow that made you feel like time didn't exist. I bought coffee that tasted like burnt hope and a pack of gum I didn't need. Back in the car, I sat for a while, hands on the wheel, engine idling, just breathing. I could still turn around, still go home to my wife, to the life we were supposed to be starting. Pretend the empty seat at the wedding was just a minor footnote in a beautiful day. But I couldn't, because I'd built a bridge with my bare hands, paid for it in overtime, sacrifice, and the memory of childhood laughter. And I wasn't going to let it rot just because he might never cross it. So I drove, mile after mile, past sleeping towns and darkened homes, past all the reasons I could have stayed away, toward the only door that still mattered, and the brother I refused to stop believing in. The rain didn't stop. It just changed moods. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it drummed like war on the hood. But it never stopped. And neither did I. The highway bled into back roads, the kind with faded lines and tree branches that reached across like they were daring you to keep going. My hands ached from the wheel. My back was stiff. And my eyes were hollow. But I kept driving. Headlights cut through the mist like tired promises. Every curve, every mile marker felt like it was pulling something deeper out of me. By the time I crossed into the outskirts of town, the sky had begun to pale at the edges. That strange, not dark, not light hour where everything looks like a memory. I slowed as I approached his street. Everything looked the same. That same lopsided mailbox. That same cracked sidewalk we used to race scooters down. His truck was in the driveway, still that dented black Ford with the busted left taillight. Just like always. I sat there for a minute. Engine off. Rain tapping like fingers on the roof. This was it. I pulled the deed from the glove compartment, tucked it under my arm, and stepped out into the rain. It was cold. Not freezing, just the kind of cold that makes you remember you're alive, that you still feel things, even when you wish you didn't. I walked up the path, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. His porch light was off. No signs of life inside. I knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. The door creaked open, just enough for him to appear. Eric. He looked older. Not in a bad way. Just worn in, like something used often but kept in decent shape. His hair was longer than I remembered. A few grays now. He was in a t-shirt and gym shorts, blinking like he hadn't slept, or like he couldn't believe I was real. Nathan? His voice was raw. I didn't speak, just held out the envelope. What's this? It's the cabin, I said. I bought it back, fixed it up. It's for all of us. He stared at the paper like it was on fire. I don't understand. For every holiday we missed, I said, forcing the words out. Every time I was gone. Every time we were broken. It's yours too. It always was. His face twisted. Confusion, hurt, something older than both. Then something broke across it like thunder behind his eyes. You think a piece of land fixes this? He snapped, stepping back. You think a cabin erases 5 years of nothing? No, I said quickly. But it's a start. You left, he hissed. You chose the uniform. The missions. You left us. You left me. I thought I was doing something right. Well, you were wrong. And just like that, the door slammed shut. I stood there, soaked and shaking, the deed crumpling slightly in my hands. He didn't come back. Not after 10 seconds. Not after a minute. Not at all. Just me. A wet porch. And a dream no one wanted but me. I slid the deed back into its envelope, walked slowly to the car, and drove into a morning that had already stopped waiting. The sun broke through the clouds like it didn't know what had just happened. As if it hadn't watched me stand on that porch, soaked to the bone, holding out everything I had left only to be met with a slammed door and a silence I could still hear echoing in my chest. Morning light spilled across the dashboard like mockery as I pulled away from his street. The road shimmered wet, but I didn't turn the wipers on. Let the water blur everything. I didn't cry, not then. There was too much numb between the rejection and the reality. I just drove. The folded flag sat beside me on the passenger seat, tucked carefully into its case, still pristine. It had felt like something I'd earned. Now, it felt like something I didn't deserve. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, teeth grinding as the windshield caught streaks of gold from the rising sun. I tried not to think about his face. The way he looked at me. Like a stranger showed up at his door offering something poisoned. Like my apology was an insult instead of a hand reaching out. The highway opened back up. Flat. Endless. I pressed the gas. Every mile away from him was a mile deeper into the ache. I thought about turning back, banging on the door, forcing him to see what this meant, to understand. But what would I even say? Please forgive me for something I didn't know I did? Please come back and make this family make sense again. He didn't want to understand. He wanted me to hurt like he had. And maybe now I finally did. I pulled into a rest stop around 9, parked in the far corner, and shut off the engine. The silence hit harder than the storm had. I leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes, and for the first time since the door closed in my face, I let the pain catch up. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even messy. Just a quiet grief, the kind that sits in your bones and whispers, "You tried." It still wasn't enough. I thought about Mia, how she smiled through the reception even though she saw my eyes constantly darting toward that chair. How she danced with my little cousin when I couldn't move. How she held me when the lights went out and I couldn't pretend anymore. She would still be asleep, probably curled up in the sheets, the wedding dress folded neatly on a chair, wondering if I'd come back broken or not at all. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the envelope again. It was damp around the edges. I stared at the name on the deed. Mine. But that had never been the point. It was for all of us. Every birthday, every missed dinner, every quiet Christmas where I sat alone and convinced myself it was enough to send a card. I'd tried to build something for us to come back to. He didn't want it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I wasn't going to burn the bridge just because he refused to cross it. I put the deed back, dried my eyes with the sleeve of my shirt, took one last breath before turning the key in the ignition. And then I drove home. Not to forget, but to remember what came next. Mia was waiting on the porch when I pulled in. Still in pajamas, her hair pulled into a loose knot, cradling a mug of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She didn't rush me, didn't run out crying or demand answers. She just stood there, barefoot on the wood, her eyes locked on mine like she already knew. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like damp earth and fresh beginnings. But I didn't feel new. I felt scraped clean. "How was it?" she asked, voice quiet, steady. I didn't answer right away. I walked around to the passenger side, opened the door, and took out the folded flag. I held it in both hands, just like I had that morning when my unit gave it to me. This time, it felt heavier. She met me halfway on the walkway. "He slammed the door," I said. "Didn't even read the deed. Told me a cabin doesn't fix anything." She didn't gasp, didn't ask why. She just nodded and said, "And you drove all the way back?" I looked at her then. Really looked. This woman who said yes to me without knowing how tangled my past was. Who married not just a soldier, but a man who was still chasing ghosts with a map no one else could read. I wanted to give him something that meant we were still brothers, I said. I thought, maybe if I built something real, something lasting, it would be enough. She reached for the flag, placed a hand gently on the case, but didn't take it from me. "Maybe it was," she said, "just not for him." I laughed bitterly. Felt like it exploded in my face. "You showed up," she said, stepping closer. "You stood on his porch and told him you wanted to rebuild something. That takes guts. Doesn't mean it mattered. To him? Maybe not," she said, "but to me, it's everything." We stood there for a long time. No cars, no phones, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees like it was trying to say something we couldn't hear yet. "I keep thinking I could have said it better," I admitted. "Maybe if I had used the right words." She cut me off. "You used the only words that mattered. I bought this for all of us. If he didn't hear it, that's not on you." That landed like a stone in a still pond, rippling outward slow and deep. I wanted him to step through that door. I wanted a hug, a laugh, a "you idiot, I missed you too." But he gave me nothing. And somehow Mia still saw the attempt as holy. We walked back into the house. I placed the flag on the mantel, a symbol of everything I'd carried, fought for, and nearly lost. Then I sat down, took her hand in mine, and whispered, "I don't know what comes next." She smiled. "Then we build it. Not with blueprints or deeds or forgiveness that may never come, but with mornings like this. And the decision to stay open, even when the door slammed shut." The days that followed passed like ghosts, quiet, weightless, but still somehow present. I didn't talk much. I went through the motions. Ate breakfast with Mia, replied to the thank you texts trickling in from wedding guests, smiled when the mail brought yet another congratulatory card from someone I barely remembered. But none of it landed. Not really. I kept going back to that porch, that damn door, that look in Eric's eyes, not just anger but disappointment, like I'd offered him ashes instead of a home. And then there was the silence. It followed me everywhere. I could feel it when I poured coffee, when I folded laundry, when I lay in bed beside Mia pretending to sleep while she traced small circles on my shoulder, trying to ground me without words. The folded flag stayed on the mantel. The deed, though, that went into the drawer beside my bed. Not out of shame. Not because I'd given up, but because I wasn't sure anymore if it had ever been a gift or just another reminder of how far I'd drifted from the people who used to know me best. Mia asked once, gently, "What now?" I didn't have an answer. For days I just kept replaying his words in my head. "You think a piece of land fixes this?" No. I didn't think it fixed anything. But it was all I had. One afternoon I found myself standing in the spare room staring at the moving boxes we still hadn't unpacked. Half of them were labeled wedding, others said Nathan, Army. I opened one, not even knowing what I was looking for. Inside were photos, snapshots from boot camp, group shots from deployment, letters I'd written to Mia but never sent. Beneath them, a framed picture of me and Eric. Summer of '98. Covered in dirt, holding up matching fishing poles, grinning like idiots. That was before everything went sideways. Before we became two halves of a story that never quite aligned again. I sat on the floor with that picture in my lap, and for the first time in days, I let the anger rise. Not at him, not at myself, just at the space between us. The years neither of us could undo. I tried, I whispered to no one. The words barely made a sound. That night, as Mia and I ate dinner in front of the TV, chicken, rice, something ordinary, she looked over and said, "You know you're allowed to be mad, right?" I didn't answer. "And you're allowed to be sad," she added. Still, I said nothing. And, she continued, setting her fork down, you're allowed to stop carrying it. That made me look at her. Stop carrying what? The silence, she said. The responsibility. You're not the only one who let time pass. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let it go. But grief doesn't leave just because someone tells you it should. It waits, it lingers, and right then it was still sitting with me at the table, not gone, but finally, maybe, seen. The cabin deed stayed tucked away in the drawer beside my bed for nearly 2 weeks. I'd open it sometimes in the quiet hours of the night just to look at the address, just to remind myself it was real, that the dream hadn't been a hallucination built from guilt and unresolved childhood wounds. But each time I unfolded the paper, it felt heavier. I started asking myself questions I didn't like the answers to. Was this really about bringing the family back together? Or had I just wanted to be forgiven without earning it? One night, after Mia fell asleep with her hand still curled against my chest, I slid out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The house was silent, but my mind was a storm. I poured a glass of water, took a long sip, and stared out the window at nothing. I tried to imagine a version of this where Eric opened the door, where he smiled, where he said, "Took you long enough." But I couldn't picture it. Not anymore. I'd started this journey thinking I was the one fixing things, that if I made the right gesture, if I extended the olive branch in the perfect packaging, everything broken between us would seal up overnight. Now, all I felt was foolish. Maybe I hadn't bought the cabin for the family. Maybe I'd bought it to feel less like the bad guy. That realization gutted me. The next morning I skipped breakfast, sat at the table while Mia made coffee, her robe tied in a lazy knot, her eyes watching me carefully. She didn't ask if I was okay. She already knew the answer. Instead, she placed a mug in front of me and said, "When I said yes to marrying you, I knew you came with shadows." I blinked. Shadows? She nodded. We all do. Yours just happened to have a name and a mailbox. I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. You think I was wrong to go? I asked. No, she said immediately. I think you were brave to go. I think you were brave to hope. But Nathan, you can't make someone come back if they're still walking away. I stared into my coffee like it held answers. It felt like failure. No, she said. It was a beginning, even if it didn't look like one. I didn't understand what she meant then. Not fully. But I let her words settle inside me, the way only truth can. Later that day, I went into the bedroom, pulled out the deed, and stared at it one more time. This time, I didn't ask what it meant. I just folded it carefully, placed it in a clean envelope, and wrote one sentence on the front in blocky, honest handwriting. Still yours if you want it. I didn't know if I'd send it, didn't know if he'd read it, but writing it made something shift. Not forgiveness, not resolution, just space. Space where something new could grow, even if it took a while. The envelope sat on the corner of my desk for 3 days. Each morning, I'd glance at it while tying my boots, half tempted to toss it in the trash. Each night, I'd pass it again, wondering what it would change if I sent it, or if not sending it was just me trying to rewrite the loss into something cleaner than it was. I didn't mail it, but I didn't throw it away either. Mia found it one evening while looking for stamps. She didn't open it, just held it in her hand for a long moment, tracing the handwriting. Still yours if you want it, she read aloud. That's a pretty good line. I sat on the couch, legs stretched out, TV flickering in the background with something neither of us were really watching. I don't know what I want him to do, I admitted. Come to the cabin? Call me? Yell at me again? I don't want it to stay like this. Mia slid the envelope back down, then crossed the room to sit beside me. You did something, she said. That matters. I stared ahead, not speaking. She didn't press. That's what made Mia different from everyone else who tried to fix me. She didn't try to make the pain disappear, she just made it easier to carry. And then, after a long pause, she added something I didn't know I needed to hear. You gave him a door, Nathan. Whether he walks through it or not, that's not on you. I turned toward her. Her eyes didn't waver. Her voice didn't crack. You're not responsible for how he handles his hurt, she continued. You're responsible for your side. You showed up. You told the truth. You opened the door. That's enough. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say that. That it wasn't all mine to carry. That maybe letting go didn't mean I was giving up. That night, after Mia fell asleep, I walked outside barefoot and sat on the porch steps, the envelope resting in my lap. The air was thick with summer. Fireflies blinked lazily over the grass. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then fell silent. I didn't feel peace, but I didn't feel hollow either. There was something else now, a seed of patience, not for him, for me. I didn't know if the cabin would ever see all of us gathered again. I didn't know if Eric would ever sit by the fire and crack open a beer like old times. But I knew I had tried. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but out of love. And for now, that was enough to stay still. The cabin came up in conversation less and less. At first, friends would ask about it every time they saw me. How's the place coming along? Or, you take Mia up there yet? Always with those easy smiles, expecting stories about cozy weekends, fireplace selfies, maybe some half-burnt s'mores, and a crooked bookshelf we built ourselves. I'd nod. Say something vague like, not yet, or still figuring out the schedule. Nobody pressed. Most people just assumed newlyweds were too busy being married to worry about side projects, and maybe that was true. But I knew the real reason I avoided it. It was a monument to the silence. A reminder. Every doorknob I'd replaced, every board I'd sanded, every screw I'd turned. All of it was done with the hope that it would mean something to someone who still hadn't called. It was hard to step inside that kind of effort when all it gave back was quiet. So I stayed away. We both did. Mia didn't ask. She never even suggested a weekend trip. She just let the subject drift into the background like a song we used to hum. Instead, we built a different kind of life. We set up the spare room with a desk for her and an old armchair I claimed as mine. We hosted Sunday dinners for her cousins. We bought too many succulents for the windowsill and forgot to water most of them. She convinced me to hang my old flag above the fireplace, said it deserved to be seen, not hidden in a box. And for the first time in years, I started to feel still, not healed, not whole, but still. There were days when I'd forget I was waiting for a call, for a knock on the door, for some miracle where Eric would show up unannounced and say, "I'm ready now." And then I'd remember. Usually at the oddest times, in line at the grocery store, washing my truck, folding the laundry. A flash of his laugh in my head, or a phrase he used to say, and suddenly I'd be right back on that porch, soaked in rain and disbelief. But the hurt didn't pierce as deep anymore. It just pulsed, a dull echo in the background of a life that was still moving forward. One night, while brushing my teeth, I looked at myself in the mirror and said it out loud just to see how it felt. You did everything you could. And for the first time, I believed it. Mia poked her head in, toothbrush in hand. "Talking to yourself again?" "Just rehearsing for the documentary," I said with a tired grin. She smirked. "Well, let me know when it premieres." We climbed into bed. The night was warm, and the window was cracked just enough for crickets to hum outside. As I drifted off, I thought about the cabin, about how empty it must feel now, and how, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the same. It was a Tuesday when I sent the message. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just a plain, quiet Tuesday where nothing big was happening, which, somehow, made it the perfect moment. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me, phone in hand. Mia was out running errands, the house still and warm with the scent of her citrus candles. The morning sun slanted through the blinds, catching on dust motes that danced lazily in the air. No one had asked about the cabin in weeks. No one except me. I'd woken up that morning with a strange feeling. Not hope exactly, not resolve either. Just a nudge. A quiet little voice in my chest whispering, "Open the door again." Just a crack. So I did. I opened a group chat we'd used once years ago. Me, my parents, 2 cousins, Aunt Rachel, my sister Jess, and Eric. It had been silent for ages, buried beneath 100 other threads. But the names were still there, still waiting. I typed the message slowly, thumbs hovering over every word. Cabins open this weekend. Firewood stacked. Bring whatever you want to drink. I stared at it for a full minute before hitting send. No fanfare, no explanation, no begging, just an invitation. I put the phone down and walked away. Didn't pace, didn't watch the screen. Instead, I went outside and started trimming the bushes out front. I swept the porch, mopped the kitchen, cleaned out the fridge like we were already hosting people, even though I knew it would probably just be me and Mia. By noon, I checked the chat. Aunt Rachel, I'll bring the deviled eggs. Jess, do we need to bring extra chairs? My mom just sent a string of heart emojis. And Eric, nothing. I wasn't surprised. But I was also okay. Because for the first time, the cabin wasn't a test. It wasn't a trap to see who showed up. It was just open. And that was enough. That Friday, I packed the truck. Sleeping bags. Extra pillows. The big skillet we only used for breakfast at the cabin. Mia made a grocery list and double-checked the first aid kit like we were prepping for a small war. We didn't talk about the text. Didn't ask what it meant that Eric hadn't responded. We just drove. The gravel road crunched under the tires the same way it always did, a familiar music that felt more like a heartbeat than a sound. When we pulled up, the cabin stood waiting, steady and solid against the pines. We opened the windows. We swept the dust. And we waited. Not for someone to fix the past, just for whoever was ready to step into the now. They came in waves. First it was Aunt Rachel, honking twice as she pulled up in her minivan, the trunk full of plastic tubs and Tupperware like we were prepping for a family reunion instead of a weekend at the cabin. She stepped out grinning, sunglasses perched on her head, arms wide like she'd just won a game show. "Still standing," she called, looking the cabin up and down. "Nathan, you actually did it." "I told you I would," I said, hugging her as she handed off a tray of deviled eggs. "Didn't think it'd take this long, though." She gave me a knowing look, but didn't say anything else. That was the unspoken rule. No talk about who wasn't here. Just gratitude for who was. Next came Jess, my sister, with her wife and their new rescue dog that barked at everything but clearly meant well. They brought s'more supplies and a Bluetooth speaker that never quite connected, but played just enough music to keep the air humming with life. Then my parents, arriving slower than I remembered them ever moving, but with that same glimmer in their eyes like they were stepping into something they thought they'd lost. We strung up lights around the porch as the sun dipped low. Someone started a fire in the pit out back. Folding chairs appeared out of nowhere. Laughter floated through the trees, light and effortless, like it belonged here. And still, no Eric. I didn't expect him. Not really. I kept myself busy, hauling coolers, flipping burgers, handing out extra blankets for the kids who were already racing through the trees pretending to be pirates or bears or both. No one brought him up. But I knew they were thinking it. You could feel it in the pauses between sentences, in the way eyes drifted down the driveway when a new car approached. But the thing was, the cabin felt alive. Even without him. For the first time in what felt like forever, the space I'd built didn't feel haunted by who wasn't there. It felt warmed by who was. Later that night, after the kids were tucked into sleeping bags and the fire had burned low, I stood on the back porch, a beer in one hand, the other resting on the rail where Eric and I once carved our initials with a pocket knife we weren't supposed to have. Mia came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. You sure?" I took a sip from my bottle. The fire crackled behind us. Someone inside was laughing, and the stars had come out in full. "For the first time in a long time," I said, "I really am." She didn't respond. Just squeezed me a little tighter. And in that quiet, in that warmth, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Maybe the circle wasn't broken. Maybe it was just waiting to be redrawn. The headlights came just after dusk. We'd settled into that golden lull where the sky holds on to light a little longer than it should, stretching the moment like it doesn't want to let go. Everyone was gathered around the fire pit. Jess strummed a guitar, half playing, half laughing at the kids begging her to do the Spider-Man theme. Aunt Rachel passed out marshmallows like it was communion. And then we heard it, gravel crunching under tires. Conversation dipped just slightly, not enough to stop, but enough to notice. Enough to feel the shift. A truck pulled into the clearing. Black. Familiar. The engine cut off. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Eric. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. He stood there, still wearing that same old jacket I remembered from high school, like time had frozen him just enough to make the moment sting. In his hand, a six-pack of cheap beer. In his eyes, something softer than I expected. He looked around the fire, saw Mom, Jess, the cousins, then me. We locked eyes, and I braced myself for a speech, a demand, a confrontation. But instead, he walked over, slow, careful, like he wasn't sure the ground would hold. He stopped just beside the fire, glanced down at the six-pack, then back at me. "You still drink this crap?" he asked. I didn't smile. But I took the beer from his hand, popped one open, and passed it back. "Not really," I said. "But I saved you a chair." He looked at it. An empty folding chair beside mine. He nodded once, just once, then sat. No big gesture, no apology, just his presence. And it was enough. Conversation picked up again, cautiously at first, then with more ease. Jess strummed something new. Mia met my eyes from across the fire, and I could see the question written in her gaze. "Are you okay?" I gave her the smallest nod. Eric took a sip of his beer, leaned back, and stared into the flames. He didn't say thank you. I didn't ask why he came. We just sat there. Two brothers side by side, letting the silence between us warm instead of burn. And for the first time since that door slammed shut, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not clarity, but maybe, just maybe, the start of something neither of us could name yet. Something like grace. He didn't stay long. A few hours, maybe. Long enough to finish 2 beers, roast 1 marshmallow, and say exactly 0 words about the past. But still, he stayed. And that mattered more than anything he could have said. We didn't talk about the cabin, or the wedding, or the years of silence that stood between us like a wall we both helped build. Instead, we talked about nothing. The weather. The dog Jess rescued that kept barking at shadows. The weird shape the moon was making above the tree line. At one point, Mia handed him a plate of food. He took it with a quiet nod, didn't touch the mac and cheese, but devoured the cornbread like it was a lifeline. Jess made a joke about his old haircut, and he actually laughed. Not loud, not long, but enough to catch me off guard. That sound used to be familiar. Now it felt like something rare. Something you don't name out loud because you're afraid it'll vanish if you do. He leaned over at one point and asked, "The wood you used on the porch, it's cedar?" "Yeah," I said. He nodded slowly. "Smells the same." That was the closest we got to anything resembling sentiment. And that was fine. It wasn't the night for grand gestures, no dramatic reconciliations, no movie scene hugs, just presence. And that was enough. The fire crackled low, and people started heading inside to sleep. Jess and her wife offered to take the futon in the den. Aunt Rachel claimed the guest room like she was defending a fortress. Mia looked at me as if to ask, "Should I leave you two?" I gave her a subtle shake of my head. Not yet. Eric stayed a little longer by the fire, staring into the flames like they might have answers, or maybe just memories. Finally, he stood. "Gotta head back," he said, brushing ash from his jeans. "Didn't tell anyone I was leaving." I stood too, not sure if I was supposed to walk him to the truck or let him disappear again. He paused, beer bottle still in hand, and looked around the cabin. "You did good," he said, voice low, "fixing this place up." "Wasn't just for me," I replied. He nodded once, then handed me the empty bottle. I took it, no handshake, no hug. But he held my gaze just long enough to say what the words didn't. Then he walked back to his truck, started the engine, and drove off into the dark. I stood there long after the taillights disappeared. No closure, no answers, just something soft and tentative blooming in the space he left behind. Maybe not forgiveness, but the beginning of permission to start again. The fire burned low, just a soft glow in the pit now, red coals winking like tired eyes. Everyone else had gone inside. Mia was curled up on the couch in the cabin, wrapped in a blanket with a book she wouldn't finish. The dog was asleep by the door. The porch creaked now and then, settling into the stillness. I stayed outside, pulled my chair a little closer to the embers, cracked open one last beer, and leaned back. Eric's chair was still beside mine. Empty now, but not haunting. It didn't ache like it used to. The silence left behind wasn't angry. It wasn't sharp. It was familiar, companionable almost, like we'd sat together for years without needing to say a damn thing, like we were finally speaking the same language again, one where words weren't required. He didn't owe me an apology. I wasn't sure I owed him one either. What we owed each other was this: the effort to show up, to sit down, and to stay quiet when quiet was enough. I thought about all the nights I'd rehearsed what I'd say to him, all the letters I never sent, all the arguments I'd had with a ghost version of my brother in my head, telling him how much he'd hurt me, asking him if he even knew what it felt like to be shut out. But now none of it mattered, because he'd come, and even if he left without saying what I wanted to hear, he came. We talked about football, about how the lake water was probably still freezing, about whether the grill I bought was gas or charcoal. We didn't talk about the wedding, or the years, or the slammed door. But the fact that he asked if the porch was cedar, that was everything. He saw it, smelled it, knew what I'd built. And for the first time, I think he understood it wasn't about the wood or the money or the deed. It was about the space, the invitation, the chance. And for the first time in years, I felt like my brother saw me again, not as a uniform, not as someone who left, but just as Nathan, just as family. I leaned forward, stirred the coals with a stick, let the sparks float up into the black sky. There was no big finish, no moment of triumph, just a chair beside mine, and the echo of laughter that didn't need translation. Tomorrow we'd pack up, say our goodbyes. Maybe someone would bring up how nice it was to have everyone together again. Maybe not. But I knew this much: the cabin was open. And so were we. It started small, just a photo. Mia printed it out a week later, framed it without saying anything, and set it on the mantel beside the flag. It was taken at the cabin. Me and Eric standing side by side, not posing, not even aware a photo was being taken. I was holding a beer. He was mid-laugh, head tilted slightly, eyes squinting at something someone had said. We looked like brothers again. Not perfect, not whole, but close enough. The next time we opened the cabin, it was Christmas. Jess brought string lights. Aunt Rachel brought her famous ham. My parents stayed the whole weekend, bundled in quilts, watching old movies with the kids while the wind howled outside like it remembered how things used to be. Eric showed up late. No warning, no message. He just walked through the door, snow in his hair, a bag of groceries in one hand, and said, "Did I miss the good stuff?" We didn't rush him. We didn't make it a thing. He dropped his bag in the kitchen, took a seat by the fire, and asked if there was still some cider left. Later, he helped me carry more logs inside. As we stacked them by the hearth, he glanced at the photo on the mantel. Smirked. "You going to print a new one every time I show up?" "Only if you keep showing up," I said. He didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. We didn't talk about what had changed. There was no need. The cabin had become what I hoped it would. A place where time slowed, where wounds didn't disappear but didn't define us either. A place where everyone had a seat, even if it took a while to sit down. Over time, it turned into tradition. Thanksgivings, birthdays, a couple New Year's Eves where the fire outlasted the champagne. The family came, stayed, returned, and every time the circle felt more solid. Not because we fixed everything, but because we stopped trying to pretend we hadn't been broken. There's a photo now, years later, where everyone's there. The kids are taller. The dog has gray in his fur. Mia's wearing one of my old flannels. Eric's on the end of the bench, holding a plate of food like it belongs to him. Because it does. We're all smiling. Not because everything's perfect, but because we're together. And for this family, that's more than enough.